The session is being recorded. All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Nathan Bilbao. I'd like to welcome you. I hope you are all safe and healthy. Thank you for zooming in from wherever you are to the HCDE Alumni Board's The Loop, panel discussion on what to expect when interviewing for user research and user experience design roles in today's market. To set expectations, this panel is meant to provide you with a perspective and some guidance on the overall process of interviewing, how to prepare, what to do during, and how to follow up after an interview. So today's panel will last about 90 minutes, starting with introductions, a little over an hour of discussions, and then 20 minutes of Q&A at the end. We're expecting over 100 HCD students to this webinar, and I'm betting you all will have a lot of common questions. So before you ask a question in the Q&A, read through whatever has been posted, upvote any questions you would like to be asked, and we'll have time at the end for 4 to 5, maybe even 6 questions. What we'll also do is we do have a poll that I'm going to kick off. And what I'd like you to do is to vote. We're going to take 1 to 2 minutes to vote on this poll, just to give our panelists some just to have some audience participation on what topics you're most interested to. So if you could go ahead, hop to the poll, and we'll have some results here in a few minutes. With housekeeping done, while you guys are voting, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel. So our panel is, what was that? Our panel is composed of a representative of each type of role you'd typically encounter during your interview process. So with that, I'd like to introduce Christina Kraus, Director of HR at Blink UX, Parker Kunsel, give a wave when your name's called, Director of Design at Oracle, Patrick Neiman, Director of UX at Knowable, Ian Wiosnik, I hope I pronounced that right, correct me if I'm wrong, Senior User Researcher at Smartsheet. I still need to invite one more person, Paula, actually Gary, if you could promote her. Paula is on the call, and then our an HCD alum, Anting Chen, newly hired as a user researcher for Adecco at Google. With that, I'd like to open up the first question of what is a design loop for the panelists. So with that, what is a design loop? What is a research loop, and how are they different? I'll open it up starting with Parker. What's
hey,
a design
Nathan.
loop? Shoot.
Sorry to interrupt you. I don't have the ability to promote people, so can you promote Paula? Thank you.
And last person promoted to join the panel is Paula Trutro, also an HCDE Alumni Board member. Welcome to the call. So first question to the group, what is an interview loop? What is a design loop?
Sure. So typically you'll find loops where you maybe will come on site and you'll go through what's called a loop, but it's like a round of interviews. Usually it's pretty much all day at a company. For design loops, you can expect to meet, I would say, one of 2 ways. Either all designers and everybody you'll probably be working with, or they might sprinkle in a few other PMs, maybe a researcher, maybe an engineer, that you'd be working with from day to day. And in this way, you'd start typically in the morning with a 45 to 60 minute presentation of your portfolios. You get a chance to get up there and tell about yourself and go through a few projects. And then they kind of break you off into some one-on-ones. And then the people that they pick for those one-on-ones, that's up to the company, obviously, but it's a mix of either all designers, if it's a design loop, or it can be a mix of design plus your other partners like PMs and research engineering and all that.
Gotcha. Ian, Ian or Christina, how is a research loop different from, say, a design loop?
So I think in the research loop and design loop, I mean, the big difference is really just the people that you're going to interact with and have the interviews with. It's going to be much more research forward. And I think also, I know in at least our over here, like we try to be, we're going to really dive into your research process much more. What you understand about the user-centered design process, how you incorporate research, what your thoughts are about research, and how you run something. On a design loop, maybe more the opposite, right? You're going to be interviewing with more designers, the people that you're actually going to work with, and the focus is going to be more on your design skills and what you're bringing to the table as far as your design. And obviously on both ends, we're always talking about like how you work with both research and design, and also with the product managers that you're going to be interacting with as well.
Got it. One of the things is like with these are very typical loops, and I know sometimes interviewing isn't always that crisp, clean, and working with some companies. Patrick, do you have any insight into what, like, say, non-typical hiring loops may be like?
Yeah, it's a little bit all over the map. If you have a loop where you have a bunch of product managers and engineers, they're going to be asking questions specifically to the context that they're involved with, as far as like prioritization, or how you present an idea or something. So they typically aren't going to understand completely about what the user experience field is about, and so you might have to actually explain it to them. And that explanation actually provides you context for how you interact with other groups, and how to explain your job, how you explain the job, and also how to solve their problems. So it's actually a good opportunity, but it also offers a little bit of challenge around, you might get some questions that might seem a little bit out of place, and so you have to be patient of refocusing on the question that they should be asking as it relates to that.
Got it. I noticed a lot of folks on the call are asking or having some QAs. There's always the big question around, how do I prepare for a loop? What's the difference, like portfolio versus presentation? I'm confused. Who has a perspective on when you should be using a portfolio, when you should be using a presentation? Why is it such a big deal?
I can jump in on how we kind of think about this at Blink. So Blink, I think, might be one of the companies that's a consultancy out of these panelists. So I would say typically what we're looking for with the portfolio is a chance to kind of dive in and see work before we bring you in for the interview. That's going to be what the recruiter is reviewing, as well as the hiring manager, to see if kind of the way that you work through a process, the way you explain that work is the way that we would want to see it. And then what we really want to see when we're bringing somebody in for that portfolio review is a presentation that's been curated for Blink. So I think getting out of your website for that interaction is really important. I think when people pull up their websites, it's always fine, it works. But when someone comes in and has really crafted a presentation that walks us through, and they really feel like they're targeting it towards the people in the room and the company that they're interviewing with, that feels like it's a little bit more valuable of an experience for us.
Can I ask a question about that as a follow-up? That might actually explain the context. How often do these designers actually present in front of clients for Blink?
We don't hire anybody that's not client-facing, so that's definitely another part of the presentation, right? The portfolio review. We're evaluating the ability for somebody to stand up in front of a room of people and explain their designs.
Yeah, for me, the presentation versus portfolio piece, when you have that moment to get up in front of an audience and share your story and talk about not just how you differentiate yourselves, but what you're about, what you're passionate about, where your interests lie. You're telling the story of you, and that doesn't come out very well on a portfolio website or Dribble account or Behance or whatever you're using for that. It's your moment to craft that really curated story that Christina was just talking about, and pitch to them why you matter, why you're different, why you're a good fit for them, or mutual good fit, hopefully. So I would say, like, definitely lean into spending more time crafting your story, and you definitely got to do it for every single company and do it a little bit differently maybe for every single audience, right? So you can start with one that I think is good, and then tweak it every single time you interview with a different company to tailor it for your audience.
How's a research presentation or research portfolio different from a design portfolio? I know this is asking the basics, but let's just cover it all for everyone. Ian?
I can jump.
Oh, sure, hunting.
Yeah, I can talk about it because I just been through a few interviews last year. So research interview usually includes some introduction of the domain of the product space, and then methodology, finding, some industry impact, whether research was being implemented into some design or it has some business implication to pivot a product to a new direction. So yeah, those are the main pillars that was covered in the presentation.
Got it. With presentations, right, we're kind of looking, everyone on the loop is looking for a little bit of a different thing. At hiring managers, when you're looking at portfolios online, I know you see hundreds of them if it's a heavy hiring season. What do you typically look at? How long do you look at a portfolio? And then what are you typically looking for when you're going through these portfolios?
I'll go ahead and answer that one. So there's a bunch of stats around this. There is a study that the Ladders did where the typical glance at a resume was about 6 seconds by a recruiter. And that correlated with a lot of research that I was seeing when I was working at JobVite. I typically look about 30 seconds at the initial portfolio, like, can they tell a story? Is it in a format of like problem, solution, process, and this or something that they learned or some kind of metric they looked at? And do they have all the elements of the process, like process flows, wireframes, maybe some visuals, maybe illustrations of user interviews that they did. Those are the typical things that I look for. And sometimes, a lot of time with the presentations, I actually talk about what the success criteria of that presentation is when I talk to the interviewees if I bring them in. And so I tell them I'm looking forward to telling the story and putting it in context and everything. And so for a lot of the people on the call, I would actually implore that you actually ask what success looks like during an interview of like, how are you being graded? Because there are a number of hiring managers in Seattle that actually can't describe what success looks like. Additionally, they've actually never been through a presentation through this. So like you should suggest to them, these are the kind of things that you're looking for that you usually try to illustrate in the presentation to show that you're proactive about it. Other comments?
One thing I would like to comment on, something I've seen more so, I think, with the junior set of researchers too, when they come through, is we'll be presenting a portfolio, and sometimes it's hard to understand. Obviously, no one expects that you've done this all on your own, whatever you're presenting, and you've almost always worked on a team. But you always be very, very clear about what you contributed to that project and like where, what were your contributions, and don't lie about it or gloss over. It's no one expects you to have done, like I said, everything. And the other thing too is that sometimes I would actually be curious what the panel thinks about this too. People will get to the end and be like, well, I could show you a few other things if you're interested. Can you pick which one? And I always find that very off-putting because I'm always like, you control the story. You tell me what you want to present. I don't know who you are or what you're doing. And that actually makes me feel like you haven't thought it through enough to think about like what's the important thing to put in front of people. So like always like thinking of like curating your message really closely and carefully about what you want to display and share.
Yeah, and I think to tag on to what Ian just mentioned and also Patrick, I think, if you're unsure of what those best things to show are, ask that before you get in the room. Don't be afraid to ask the recruiter or the hiring manager that's scheduling you for the in-person presentation. What, you could say, would you like to see one evaluative, one generative research project? Would you like to see, this type of design work or this? What's the team really going to be interested in so that you can better curate your presentation before you get in the room, and then you can really, like Ian said, control that story and that presentation once you're there.
Yeah, a comment on top of that, if they reply with an answer or a set of answers, then they actually thought deeply about the interview process and what kind of person they're valuing when they come into that. Like Blink, to the point, like Blink has a presentation heavy environment because they're presenting in front of a lot of clients. I now work in a presentation heavy environment because we're all remote. And so that storytelling is also important as part of it. There are other places that you could work at it in Seattle that don't have that. And so that becomes less important and that should actually be depreciated as part of the interview process as far in looking at more of working in an agile environment, for that as an example.
Got it. Christina, what your point was about, or like the panelists, one of your points was about making sure to ask the interviewers or the recruiters what they want to see, whether it's generative or whatever a certain type of contribution may be. What advice can you give to our audience about how do you decide what type of projects you should put into your portfolio, right? You're either a student, you're just trying to find experience, you have a passion project, right? How do I choose?
I can give my 2 cents, but I'd love to hear what some of the hiring managers would say on the call that are you know, the researchers and designers in the room. From an HR perspective, I think that the work that you're going to put in your portfolio, one, needs to be really crisp, really well thought out. Like I think Patrick or somebody mentioned, make sure you have that story in the portfolio. If you can't craft that story, then I don't think it should be in your portfolio. It's just going to be a distraction. And I'd also say don't be scared of putting in passion projects or things that aren't even school projects. We like to get to know people, and if you've got a personal passion around healthcare and you took it upon yourself to do something in that field in your spare time, put that in there. That excitement will come out in the portfolio, and that'll be a really nice, refreshing thing to see. But I think also you do need to have some really concrete pieces that show that you've been through the process and you have a foundational understanding of the process, the methodologies or whatever it might be that you're diving into, whether it's research or design. So I think having that variety is really important. And of course, any real world experience, if you can get an internship project on there where you've worked with a real company with real limitations and challenges, those are really valuable to see alongside those school projects.
Yeah, I can just chime in of saying I really love seeing a mix of projects. One that could be very technical, where it required you to work closely with an engineer on some product, if it's a product design, type app, software, what have you. Another project maybe that you're super proud of and really passionate about. Because then I could see you light up and how excited you get over that one. And then another one that really showed your thought, or if you drove it, if you were the main lead on the project and you drove it from soup to nuts, so from research to ideation and delivery. That's also great to see. But I especially want to see something that's relevant to the job I'm hiring you for. So if you made some cupcake delivery app, but I'm in the enterprise world, it might be harder for me to understand like how a consumer app on a mobile device translates to, if I just only work on enterprise stuff. But if you can translate how that customer relates to the customer that I have, that's where you're going to be strong in showing me any project. So as long as you can translate that over for me and help me understand, that would be, I think, successful too. And then to play off what Christina said and Patrick maybe about crispness, please spell check all your stuff and maybe even have friends or somebody with great grammar look at it. I can paste into the chat this awesome tool that I've used a lot called Grammarly. You basically can paste in whole bodies of text, and it's like having your 10th grade English teacher in your pocket. So there's really no excuse for misspelling or bad grammar. And that'll definitely knock you down in your audience's eyes sometimes if they're sticklers for that. It just takes away that distraction.
Awesome. So talking about making sure you can relate to your hiring manager, a lot of our a lot of HCD students are either coming in as undergrad, but we have a large body of master students who are transferring from one career to getting into the design world or the HCD world. What piece of advice could you give? Our master students about how to frame their prior experience for their new sets of roles that they're trying to shoot for?
I'll speak to this because I did exactly that. So, you know, I came from a world as a structural engineer, architect, and, you know, moved over in UX and had a bunch of other completely irrelevant, you know, experience in UX before that. And I mean, I decided to make a move when I got confident enough to speak in like the lexicon of just UX, where I could hold a conversation and hold my own. So I waited till I got to that point to really go for it. But then two, you know, I was able to like say, you know, I have an analytical mind, and I've learned a lot about math and rules and like really diving into problems and solving it, you know, through my engineering background. And I think that that's taking me, you know, into being a researcher, right? Like, and I think that's a very easy leap for people in the room to make with me. That like that's, and they're like, man, and even accentuated, that's a skill that maybe not everybody else who's going to come into this field is going to have. I'm going to bring something unique and a different perspective because of that. And that's actually a huge selling point, because I mean, we all work in an industry where we're trying to be diverse and have different perspectives and have people who are going to think slightly out of the box or whatever you want to say, but just really sell yourself no matter what that experience is.
Hiring managers, I kind of have a follow-up to that, is like, when you see someone with limited design experience, but they have a robust previous working experience, what's going through your minds when you're evaluating them, their portfolios, their resumes? What are you looking at beyond what you see in their portfolio or what they've demonstrated?
You know, are they hungry? Have they already tried to do what we need them to do? Whether or not they were hired for it or they, you know, launched something. If you don't have anything in your portfolio that shows that you tried on your own or explored that, I think that would be helpful to see.
I can jump in. So I'm a product manager. I'm not hiring for research or design, but I have hired for product before, and the same thing applies, which is just, you know, you can always show an example of anything you've done on your own time. And this is especially true, I think, when we see interns come through, because that's a great example of someone who probably hasn't had the real world experience, but the ones that just get a straight phone screen from me are the ones, like I work at Hulu, they literally put together a product plan for how we should fix our Android app, like top to bottom. Just no one asked for it, but like it was just that huge icing on top for me to see as a hiring manager for an intern that summer, of like, okay, this person's serious. Like, I need to talk to this person, and there's so much to talk about all of a sudden. So even without that experience, putting anything together does make you stand out, because I think you'd be surprised as someone applying for a job how many things are just standard resume, or like very standard portfolio, or just the web link. And anything you can do to differentiate yourself is well worth it, I think.
Yeah, I had one intern that they interviewed with us, and they had listed that they'd managed a team at Burning Man, and it became this whole other level conversation about managing very difficult personalities to get something done. And even though they didn't have a lot of UX work in their background, I knew that they knew how to work in challenging environments, and so it was almost an instant hire. Like, I'm looking for stuff that's unusual, that's reaching, that shows that they're trying to grow in something in an area where they're going to be very uncomfortable at, and it also has a lot of ambiguity in it, because it shows that they can handle UX, because the very similar skill sets for navigating, and it's also the EQ portion of it too, is part of that kind of a project.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I can say
go ahead.
just to piggyback on what some others have said. I think the things you were mentioning before, just transitioning from other career fields, and how you can tell that story. I think, like Patrick was saying, there's some things that come from other fields that you can pitch. Ian was mentioning an analytical mindset. I think a natural curiosity, a comfort with ambiguity. Like these are things that can come from other fields and other careers that translate very nicely into UX. I'll also say, and I might be the only one, you guys can tell me if I'm crazy, I still ask for a cover letter. And I think that that's a great additional piece for storytelling. Your portfolio is there to showcase your work. You usually have a short about page, but it's generalized for everyone. Like Paula was saying, resumes are very similar lots of the time. And if you can tell that story or intrigue me with something in your cover letter about how you managed a group of people at Burning Man or whatever that might be, that's an additional way to kind of bring people in if maybe your experience or your resume is a little bit light.
Awesome. So one last question about how do I choose my portfolio pieces? Some folks have NDA work, right? A lot of HCD students have to go through an internship, but that doesn't necessarily mean they can share their work. How should design and research candidates share their portfolio pieces that are under NDA? It's valid, good work, but right, I can't show it to you because of legal binding contract. So how do we get around that? What kind of pieces of recommendation would you have, or like how have other candidates done this?
I could tell a story about that. So there was one designer that I was mentoring where she had worked on the Fire TV app for Amazon, and she couldn't talk about it because it wasn't released yet. And so she actually crafted a secondary story that walked through the research that she did with it, using a different metaphor, for example, a farmer's market. And it was a wonderful, wonderful story because it left enough hints about how she approached the problem, and like the problems that she was trying to solve in a different consumer experience that was very similar. So she did, not only did she do the research on the actual problem, but she did research on adjacent and analogous problems to show how that she would solve it. Another thing that I look for is asking questions about domain experience. For example, where I'm working at now, I hired one designer that had experience in contract management. And so I was able to ask him some very targeted questions about the work he did without having him violate the NDA of the project.
I can share a personal anecdote of me kind of being in your shoes where you are. So when I was graduating grad school, after about a year, I had an opportunity to interview at Apple for what was going to be maybe like my dream job, working in this future advanced interface group. And I was just at a grad school, and I had been working on some stuff at T-Mobile at the time. And Apple's really secretive; they don't let anything out usually. So I wanted to show that I respected that, and I didn't show anything from what I had built at T-Mobile, and I only showed grad school projects. And I think Apple was really disappointed in not seeing any real world work. And it kind of taught me, like, is there a better way to do that? And I think in the industry, it's kind of a thing where you can decide to show some stuff behind closed doors, and make sure you say this this is between us, or not give any leave behinds, not leave any like digital leave behinds, or put it up public on your website or anything like that. But there are ways to talk about it or even show pieces of it behind closed doors, or in confidence with somebody, at a coffee shop or something if you're meeting them one-on-one, just so you can say, I have worked on this thing, or I can show some stuff. Because otherwise, if you are very new and you haven't had a lot of experience or anything shipped that you can publicly point to, it is almost nearly impossible, right, to show that. So I didn't end up not getting that job, but it's sort of a common practice in the industry to show and talk about things, behind closed doors, but just be really careful. Sometimes that could get you in trouble, or if you leave something public somewhere, you don't want to do that, because then you're violating your NDA that you definitely signed. So just be really careful. Definitely you can password protect things, but that's digital. Somebody can take a screenshot, right? So I would say, I'd love to show you some stuff I worked on, but I can't send it to you. I could definitely show you in person, and then that gets the interviewer the face-to-face, right? Obviously, in the last 2 months, things have changed, so you don't have face-to-face anymore, but just thought I'd show you that.
That kind of leads into the next section of our talk. I'd like to move. So we've talked quite a bit about portfolio and preparation, and some of the best practices and what to do. I'm sure we'll have some more Q&A questions at the end. But so now you've got your portfolio together. It's roughly right. It's good to go. Let's put your foot out there. What are your recommendations to designers and researchers coming into the market on how to get your foot into the door, right? Anting, you just recently published this article on Medium through the alumni board that said you applied to 200. Let's see, I have the numbers here. You went through 200 applications, 29 interviews, and 14 on-sites. How did you get your foot in the door? That's one way to get in the foot in the door. What are some of the other ways in which you can get your foot in the door?
Yeah, I would say when I was a student, there are some school company sponsor projects that would really help you get a sense of what industry work was like, but then you don't really get to work with industry partners and then really get to deal with stakeholders and scope the project in some way. So there are definitely some things that are missing there. So when I was still a student, I listened to a lot of podcasts, I went to a lot of meetups, I read a lot of articles to learn about what struggles professionals have in their daily work. And then I also reach out to professionals and do one-on-one informational interview with them, and that really helped me get a face-to-face interaction and get some questions answered. So that also helps. And then getting some internships or getting some contract work also helped me get some real-life experience that I can talk about what project that I lead from end to end that helped me get to my next in-house work.
I have a suggestion that kind of reminded me of what just Anting said, is that reaching out to professionals. And I know people sometimes say well, can I really message someone on LinkedIn? Can I really do that cold? Even if you just can find one person to talk to, that person, and make it a goal when you chat with one person, say they agree to meet with you and you're like, thank you for meeting with me, and you go through your whole thing, you're so grateful and you have a great conversation. Make sure to set a goal for yourself for that person to introduce you to someone else. You just had a great conversation, maybe about your passion, something you're interested in, they know a little bit more about you. Have them introduce you to someone that they think would be a great contact for you. And that way you're growing your network in somewhat of an organic way, in a way that, has a path that makes sense. Oh, you just spent the whole hour talking about how much you love, Amazon Prime. Let me introduce you to, someone that I know that works there. That's a simple one, but make it a goal whenever you do have a professional meeting to get introduced to someone else.
Yeah, adding to Paula's comment, and this is about, and I know it's a little bit late because all these students are graduating, but when you start an HCD program, you actually have to start your job search then, and then you start networking of talking to people in the field and everything, and start doing that. And so I watched a designer from, of all places, SVC, go through the process of actually planning out that year outreach. And she got a job with a major company in Seattle where she watched the hiring manager actually hire her and get rid of all the 200 other applicants, because it was all through personal networking. Most of the better jobs disappear before they even hit a job board, because it's usually with your personal referral versus applying blindly for a job.
Awesome. So as always, network seems to be the big push, right? You need to be making those personal connections with folks, talking to them, reaching out to them, and on LinkedIn. Even if you don't get a response, you reached out, but having that plan about how you're trying to get there. Once you've applied, you get that phone call. Like, some of us have never had that phone call yet. And I was wondering if someone could explain, like, what is the purpose of a phone screen? What are the expectations of a phone screen? And, what are some pieces of advice when we're going through it? Because it can be a little stressful. Like, this is your first major touch point with a potential hirer.
I can give an oversight of what I'm doing. I'm not part of the process at Blink. So just to give everybody an idea of how we start out, I partner with a hiring manager depending on the role, and I'm kind of that first step whenever you're going to talk to somebody. So I work with the hiring manager to screen resumes and portfolios, and then we select a pool of candidates to do that initial phone screen with me. I think Blink is probably a little bit different than some of the bigger companies in town, where that first phone call might just be informational to make sure that, like, at a very high level, you're a good fit for things like start date, salary, status, if they can't support, sponsorship or something like that. At Blink, it's going to be a little bit more of a deep dive. But my major things that I want to accomplish in that 30-minute phone screen is to get to know you a little bit better, to hear you tell your story, to see if you seem excited about our company. I ask every single person in that phone interview, why Blink? Why this position? And the answers are really telling. If somebody says, I saw someone speak, and ever since then I've been following you guys, and I just read this blog last week, that immediately makes me perk up to hear that passion and excitement about our company. Whereas if somebody just kind of gives off a reason why it would be good for their career, or, this work that they saw on the website is kind of cool. So I think it's really to get at whether the people are really passionate and excited, and also just to make sure that you have the foundational skills that I know that people need to be successful. And then you would be moving on from there to talk to the hiring team. That's more the designers or the researchers who would be evaluating you more deeply on those technical skills that you would need to succeed. So that's kind of how we do it at Blink.
I think in addition to that, it's obviously them, like Christine was just saying, the company is sussing out what you bring to the table maybe for them. But I think there's also that mutual fit, thinking of what do they have that can benefit you? What, is this gonna be a spot where you can grow at a company like Blink or Oracle or wherever else? Are you both gonna get something really great out of it? Are you gonna be here for not just 6 months, but like years, several years? So it's gonna be fruitful in many ways on both sides.
Awesome. So typically, like, if it does go well, right, the recruiter would then pass on to the hiring managers. Hiring managers would then reach out, and you'd have a secondary phone call. Like, hiring managers, could you give an example of a first-time meet that went well, and like a first-time meet that didn't go well, and what you shouldn't really be doing, or something that exemplifies those two scenarios?
Anybody jump in? Nathan?
Oh, I'm moderating, so Parker, I'm gonna poke to Parker.
Okay.
So yeah. I mean, most of the screens I've had is basically it's usually a recruiter, and then usually in person with me, or like a phone call with me. And I had one candidate that there's a little bit of the, hey, can you design? And then there's a little bit of the, do you have the EQ to handle the environment? And so I had one designer actually walk me through how he, quote, bribed developers to get empathy and to get them to work better with him. And that went really, really well, because it showed he knew how to work with other people. And that was an example of something that I would like to see from other designers. It's not just about presenting your design, but it's also about building trust in the organization for you. And if you have that as part of your toolbox, then that's something that you should talk about in either the first or second. Additionally, a lot of the recruiters I've worked with, they ask a pairing of, do you fit within the, basically in the banding, and also they ask a few behavioral questions, because they don't know anything about design, but they do know about culture, and they're probably better equipped to judge how someone would fit in the culture than a lot of designers would be during the interview process.
Yeah, hopefully when a hiring manager looks at your portfolio and has been given some input from how the phone screen went, and see your resume and your portfolio, and when they get to you and you're having a phone screen with them, or even a 1 hour interview screen with just a hiring manager, they are definitely looking at culture fit, what you're going to bring to the team. Is it not just a value fit, but value add? Like, what are you going to bring to my team? I think that's when things go really well. It's like, oh yeah, I like talking to this person. I could see, by listening to them, I could see how we could work together. But what else are they interested in or passionate about that is going to add to my team? And I think that's when things go really well. They're like, yeah, I think they have all the foundational stuff in there, because I can see some of that. They can talk intelligently about it. Then I think that's, for me, like the screen with the manager is really nailing the overall interview, because then at that point, if they like you, they want to bring you in for a loop. You kind of have already sold, for the most part. I would say there's exceptions, but for the most part, you've already sold the hiring manager. Now they want to make sure that you can fit with the team and the team checks you out. It's not a done deal, but that's usually how it goes. If anybody disagrees with me, let me know.
Right. So you meet with the hiring manager, they're pretty much sold. Let's bring you onto the loop. So let's talk a little bit about how do you like expectations of an interview loop. So at a couple different companies, right? Interview loop, come in, you do a presentation at the beginning, and then you may have 5 to 6 hours of one-on-one interviews. What is the purpose, and what are some best practices when you first come into the door and give that group presentation with your portfolio?
Well, definitely show up early, and ask to be able to show up early, at least 15 minutes, so you can plug in to whatever technology you're going to be presenting on, because it almost always fails. So you want to make sure that your colors are great, looking great, your screen fitment of your presentation fits the screen, everything is legible. That way you look professional and you prepared, because that then doesn't have to be a problem the rest of the day. When everybody shows up and you're ready to go and maximize that time, because people are always late to meetings. So if you do have 45 to an hour to do your presentation in the beginning, you can count on way less than that, because people might arrive late, or the technology is not working, or you're not allowed in that room. So if it is like an hour, plan on really only having 40, 45 minutes. So I would say if you can plan for that stuff, it's going to maximize your time of telling your story, asking them questions, having them ask you questions.
I would say being user-centered about your audience. So let's say you're presenting for that first group presentation to, 4 to 5 people. Take a moment to, if they don't already do it off the top, because sometimes we don't, I don't know, people forget, we all know each other sitting on this side and we're just looking to learn from you. Ask the people who are sitting in front of you just to introduce themselves and what their roles are, if you didn't already know ahead of time, but kind of, you do know, put your user-centered hat on and think about that experience itself and how you want it to go. Because if, for example, sometimes there's last minute changes and you thought you were going to have 2 researchers and 3 designers, but they plugged in a product manager at the last minute, which has happened to me. And I'm sitting in the room and I'm suddenly thinking about all these product questions I want to ask this person in my one-on-one with them. And they didn't even know that, you know what I mean? So you want to know who you're talking to and how to best relay, get any questions that they may have answered. It's going to serve you better because your story is going to make a lot more sense to that audience.
Yeah, just to add, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, you know, kind of yes-anding to what I just heard from previously here too, like having questions ready. Like think ahead before you get in the room, like what questions do you want to ask to the group even, you know, and then be prepared for a few of those questions that are almost certainly going to come, like why X company or whatever you're at. Like, you know, don't be surprised by that question when it comes, you know, have a thoughtful answer and make it seem like you actually, you know, you want to be there, because that's going to be the first thing that they're going to weed out on 100%. If you can't answer well, like why you're there, you will not go farther. Yeah, and I think also the prep, if you can, you know, I like the idea of asking everybody in the room, you know, to introduce themselves, but also know who's going to be in that room. I can think of at least a couple of cases where someone came in and clearly had, when we give everybody the names of who's going to be in the room, and they had not looked ahead at least just to even sort of get an idea of who they were going to be talking to. And that was, in my mind, kind of the end of it. Like you haven't been thoughtful enough to come and prepare for us, you know, as well.
And I'd add another important thing that I see go wrong frequently in portfolio reviews is respecting the time that we've given you. Everybody in that room is busy and probably has a meeting at the very end of your meeting. And if we say, you know, come in and be prepared to present a 40-minute presentation, just demonstrate 2 to 3 projects, and leave the last 20 minutes open for questions and answers, you better know I'm sitting in that interview making sure that you can hit that 40-minute mark, because that's really important, right? To be able to get everything in the interview accomplished that we'd like. And it also just shows that you've prepared. So practice that presentation that you prepare and time yourself and make sure that you can really come in and deliver a really crisp presentation, and account for questions. Because, you know, as you're going through these projects, the design managers and research managers in the room, they're going to want to know why you made certain decisions. They're going to throw, you know, a case in there like, oh, well, what would have happened if this came up? How would you approach that? So give yourself some time. And then I'd also say a really small thing that I love when people do, still bring in your resume. It gives people a piece of paper to write on, and like if they think of a question but they don't want to interrupt you, they have something to jot it down on. They can write like their thoughts about you after the interview, and they keep that on their desk. You know what I mean? So it is still like a novel item that you can pass out that shows that you're prepared, but it also becomes a really nice tool for the people in the room that might have just bolted in from their last meeting. And now they have, you know, all of your experience right there and can also make notes on that.
Yeah, definitely practice a lot. I would say, you know, try to run through your entire presentation end to end and time yourself, you know, at least 5 or 6 times, either, you know, the week before leading up to it, because that timing is really important. You don't want to have 3 projects that you absolutely would love to show and tell your story, and then 30 minutes later you've only gotten through 1, and now you've missed a chance to show those other 2 that just also, you know, show how awesome you are. This happens a lot in interviews, and I wish that candidates would really practice and just have it like exactly down, but still come across as themselves, obviously. But yeah, definitely practice it.
And I'll talk about this from my own experience too. So one stupid mistake that I made in an online interview was I mute myself and my video as well going into the interview. Well, I didn't mute my audio, but then when I was practicing introduction, everybody heard it when they joined. So don't repeat my mistake. And then another thing is adding to a lot of people here that is time your interview, time the presentation, and ask in advance how many projects they expect you to present. Because I have been in loops where I spend like most of the time presenting one while they actually prompt me to jump to another project when there was only 5 minutes left. So yeah, just definitely know who will be in the panel. Well, not in the panel, but in the loop in your presentation, and then also time how you will present 2 projects or 3.
I forgot one more thing too. This is just a personal thing for me. I always want to see someone present the slide, I guess, especially on the junior role, of the UCD process, but please do not spend all the time that we have going through that process. I've seen that happen a lot, and like I promise you, everybody in that room is well familiar with it. I'd rather use to demonstrate it in your work than talk about a diagram that you have up there. So it's fine if it's in there for just like a slide, but just not to dwell on it.
I got one other oddball one that actually happened in a loop that I was in. I could not use my laptop to present, and I do everything in Keynote. And so I had to export it and then put it on a PC to show. And so I always make sure that whatever presentation I do, I export it to make sure it looks like good on PowerPoint. And so I don't use any crazy fonts or anything, or I might actually bring along the fonts on a USB drive to make sure whichever platform I have to present on, it's going to look good.
Yeah, and if it's cloud-based and you can't access the internet for some reason that day, you might be screwed. So yeah, that's a good idea of bringing it as a backup. Another thing on the loop I want to just add is that you might have a panel. So your big presentation that you do for the first hour, let's say, of your loop day, it might be with 10 people, it might be with 20 people, but it might be with a large group, and you might not get to see any of those people ever again the rest of the day, and only some one-on-ones with certain people. So that's your one chance to kind of sell the group on what you're about and leave them with why you want to join or what you're excited about. So make sure again that you have you leave yourself some time at the end to kind of wrap up and do that kind of last minute thing to the group.
Yeah, I have a question for this group that actually might be of value. I did a bunch of research and I found the typical hiring loop was like 4 to 5 people, and then there's usually a presentation in front of 5. But some of the loops I've seen have had 10, 15 people at the presentation. How much of a vote do those people get as part of the interview process that are not in the one-to-one or the team interviews?
For us, they can provide an opinion, but they don't get to give the vote, the yes/no vote.
Same. It's mostly like a communication, cultural fit kind of thing. Like, do they communicate like we do? Will we get along in environments like this? Those are the kinds of things we hear, but they're not decision makers.
Yeah, it's added color, but
they do introduce bias, right? How do we feel about that?
So usually go ahead.
I just didn't hear it. Bias, right?
Yeah, because they do introduce bias because they see a presentation, they might not have given a perfect presentation, or there might be somebody else in the org that influence it. Do we feel like that's a fair practice?
Well, the bias may come later, I guess, but like our decision, like the vote has been cast before we get in the room to discuss. Right. So like, it's like we go through Greenhouse is a software that we use to do this. And it's like, you have to say, type your reasoning up and say, yes, strong no, or whatever that degree is. And that's up there before we ever start discussing, so the bias can come in later. Yeah. And I think it's a color point added afterwards.
Yeah. Every company that I've been at, has done it a little bit differently, but when I was at Uber, they do have that panel. They're the ones that have like the weighted vote, and everybody's supposed to vote before they come into the meeting. And then there's one person that's outside of the core team that's going to work with this candidate, who kind of can cast the tiebreaker vote, if you will. And that's usually not the hiring manager, or wasn't at Uber at least. So there's no bias there either. But yeah, it's important, I think, to hear all of the opinions about the candidate, because you want to make sure that you didn't miss something. So maybe some of these people who did one-on-ones, they couldn't make your presentation in the beginning, so they missed out on that, and they only had you one-on-one for half hour or so. So I think that's why some teams do listen to everybody, but then there's like 5 people that get to cast the vote, or 6 or 7, whatever the loop was.
Now, say this may not actually always be bad, because my manager has in a loop where he's not a hiring manager, but he's actually interested in the candidate. He wasn't in any of the one-on-one, but actually he wanted to hire the person. So for some companies that does general recruiting, this may happen.
Got it. One thing of note that I'd like to piggyback on is, right, with COVID-19, we didn't anticipate it. Like, we're all disrupted, but it's definitely something we can now prepare for going into the next hiring, our next jobs or next careers. What pieces of advice can you give to our audience about how do you present your work remotely? How do you interview remotely? How can you still form that connection with these people, but not in person? And how is it, and last tag along to that question is, how has COVID really affected your work and how you go about hiring as well?
I can start off. I think, well, first up, it hasn't been so much of a change. I think, in all of our companies, we're in kind of the digital tech space. And so I'm often interviewing people that might be on the East Coast, or not. We don't fly everyone out for an in-person interview. So we're often starting out some of the interviews over Zoom if the people aren't in the local area. So I think we're lucky in that sense that most of the company is really comfortable with the platforms that make this possible. I think if you're going to get on Zoom for an interview, the good thing going for you is that everybody is in the same boat with COVID. So, if your kid walks into the interview accidentally, you're going to have a more understanding crew right now than you might when we all can go back into offices and control our environments a little bit more. So take that into account, but also I would recommend everybody really try to plan their environment so that it is conducive to the interview. Keep noise down, get in a place that's well lit, look at what your background is, see how you're going to come across so that people can really focus on you. Get your head close to the camera. When people are like really far back and there's like a whole room behind them, I just find myself like searching their home for like what's going on. So try to just limit the distractions, I think, so that you can really keep it about you and your work. And then of course, just practice like you would for an in-person interview. Prepare for the people, run through your slides, get used to the technology you're going to be using. That's kind of my initial thoughts.
I almost don't want to ever see a website ever again. I'm more oriented at seeing decks and presentations, and websites seem to be such a dated concept in today's environment.
Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by a website's out of date?
Meaning that a lot of us are now presenting full time. Like right now, I'm spending 4 hours a day on Zoom calls. People I work with, and so we have to be really focused on time and the message that we're delivering. And so during an interview, I'd want to see that. And so walking through a website is really, really hard. Or walking through a PowerPoint with crisp writing and really concise points is a lot easier. So it presents a lot better on during a video call.
I think the mediums are just different, used for different purposes. These days.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, that's the presentation is the thing that I want to see on the call. Website I might find, but it's not the typical way that I evaluate designers anymore.
And just to speak as someone who, I'm reviewing designs or listening to findings from research all the time, it's in a deck. It just is. Like, no one's pulling up a website unless you work for a company that's making websites. That's totally a different thing. But like your designs and how you share them, they will usually be in decks. Sometimes they're in the tool itself, like Figma or Abstract shares it out, but they still look like slides even in those tools.
Yeah, and you might also consider that you can control the presentation a lot more than you can a website, because if you're telling somebody to go to a website, are they viewing it on their phone? Are they viewing it on a tablet or a laptop? Is a window 1920 by 1080, or is it vertical? Like your responsive or adaptive presentation that's in a website might behave, not how you intended it. So, and I think everybody's just in presentations all day long, like Patrick said. So it's kind of the norm now.
Adding one more thing on presentations, don't like, there was a designer I mentioned years ago, and she got overly cute on her website, and I said, nobody cares. And so I would rather see a clean presentation layout, even something that's downloaded off of like Google Slides or something, or Keynote, than they try to do something overly custom. They're reinventing the wheel, and it's really about the story that I want to see, not about how creative they were in creating that presentation. The work actually should show for itself, and the theme itself shouldn't distract from it.
Got it. One other like topic that comes up with COVID-19 is how will it impact some of jobs availability, like the jobs available in the market right now, as well as recruitment? How has that changed for the companies that you're at right now, and what is the outlook for people looking for employment?
Well, as you all can probably tell, times are uncertain right now, and so are the financial outlooks for certain companies. So they're looking to make sure that they're on strong footing across the board. So one of that is headcounts. So they might be evaluating, do we have enough people to work on what we need to get done for right now, and can we hold off on anything just in case, to shore up our cash reserves and stuff like that. So I'm just trying to be clear with you on how, from the CFO level down, they're instructing, their different orgs, like the design org or research org, just to tighten up right now, just in case, just to kind of prepare for, being a little worse. So I think you are seeing some companies are halting hiring, or they're putting the brakes on any offers going out, or pausing things. That's not to say that nobody is hiring. It just might be slower, or people might be slower to respond to you as well. So don't worry that, they haven't gotten back to me in 2 weeks, they're ghosting me. They might have good reasons, but just a lot of things are weird and happening. So just be empathetic to that.
I think too, one thing we're talking about right now is our summer internship program, which I'm sure a lot of people on this call are interested in, internships that are happening this summer. And we've kind of gone through this transition of the conversation that started out as, okay, we're definitely still having our summer internship. It's in June. That's so far away, to now this is sort of creeping into that time. And so the conversation has gone though from, well, if it's still impacting us in June, maybe we should cancel, to we've been doing this pretty well remote for the last month and a half. Maybe we could host an internship remote. So like Parker was saying, like the conversations are happening behind closed doors, and that might slow down your response. But it doesn't necessarily mean that things won't work out. So I would say still remain hopeful. People definitely are being more cautious now. We have paused openings here where others are open and full steam ahead. So it just kind of depends on the companies you're applying to and kind of what their economic landscape is, I think, because it's not just COVID, right? It's the coming recession that people are talking about and things like that. So unfortunately, I think you're not in the happiest of markets right now. I will say that if you're comfortable and open to contract gigs, some companies might be going that way more. People that don't want to commit to a full-time permanent headcount might instead say, let's open up a contract role for 6 months. Maybe it's contract to hire. So keep an eye out for those opportunities, and maybe do some research to understand what that would look like for you personally.
Awesome. We've got 5 minutes before we're going to break to Q&A. One last question is, like, say you're fortunate enough to, right, you get your foot in the door, you go through the interview, if you get an offer, how do you determine what is the right fit? How do you determine when do you say yes, and also when do you say no? Because sometimes no is also just as important as saying yes. So my question is, like, oh, go ahead, Anting.
So for me, I think for the first 2 or 3 contracts that I had, I basically say yes, when the opportunity feels right, because I need to build up industry experience. And imagine someone who just out of school without any industry experience, when you get asked, like, how do you collaborate with different cross-functional team and like PMs, designers, and engineers without those experiences? It's just really hard to say. So I would say grab any opportunities to get your foot into the door, and then you have more expertise and have more power when you have more experience to put into the table and negotiate other things.
I think too, it's important, you know, like I think some other people have alluded to in this call, you're evaluating that company as much as that company is evaluating you in interviews. And while I completely understand that when you're fresh out of school, you don't have the license to be as picky as later in your career, I think that there is a balance, right? Don't take something that you feel you're going to truly not be passionate or excited about. I think what's nice is usually there's, as long as the culture is strong, there's something interesting in the work that you can find and latch onto when you're young and just interested in learning and getting more experience. But if there's any red flags, you know, that experience won't be worth it, because you know what a recruiter does not want to see on a resume is a bunch of really short stints at places. You know, so if you accept a job and 3 months later put in your notice, that's a red flag for a recruiter, unless of course it was an internship or a short-term gig. But when you're evaluating full-time roles, you want to make sure that it's at a place, you accept a job at a place that you can see yourself staying for enough amount of time that it would look good on the resume.
Yeah, I'll back that up too. Like I've always weighed a lot on culture, almost more than what the job was about. Personally, I always feel like I could do a lot of things as long as the people I work with are good, and that's because like the job being interesting obviously is always very important. You want to be into it, but like it's the people that keep me there. You know, do I really like being around these people? Do I consider them, you know, friends, people I care about, or you know, is this and what is the culture that you pick up on it, and as a company cares for the people that are employed there. I just generally, I think the places that have long-term retention of employees, you know, that's a hallmark of them. They have a good employee relationship. As for an internship, maybe not quite as important, maybe, but like still you want to be treated well. And I think even for an internship, maybe it's even more important because you can get taken advantage of. And you could also maybe be taken advantage of to the point where you're not really getting the experience that you want to learn from. So just to be really careful about that. If you pick up on anything like that, it's not worth it.
I'll add one thing. I had someone do this for an internship I hired for last year. I thought it was really clever. Assuming you get the job and it's just about your decision now, whether you want to take it or not, the ball's kind of in your court. So it's not crazy to reach out to either the hiring manager or someone in HR and saying, hey, is there someone, can I meet more of the team? You know, I really loved who I met day of or during the interview, but you know, 5 hours is just not enough. And is there someone that would be willing to have a coffee chat or like a quick phone call to tell me more about the day-to-day of the team? That's usually a very like low effort thing that the team's going to say yes to because they want you to join. They've already given you the offer. So it's something that I've only seen done once, but I thought that was brilliant. And like, if I'm ever looking for a job, I'm totally doing that because you're going into a job that, you know, for an internship, it's short-lived. If you're doing that for full time, that's your 8 to 12 hours a day, every day for years. So you want to make sure it's the right decision, especially if you're deciding between a couple different places with different cultures. So just another way to get more information that's not always obvious, but you can ask.
On a note, the follow-up email is underrated. I actually do not get those as much as I expected I will. But it is like the smallest thing that you can do, just to say, send an email to the people, everybody that you interviewed with, by the way, too, not just like one or two. If you can get everybody's email, it's not always possible, but even ask the recruiter that you talk to if you can, and just say thank you and make it personal, not like a boilerplate thing that you send to everybody. Like talk about the thing that you talked about with that person. And so that they know you cared, you took the time to remember it. And I think that actually, it's just that little thing to like bump you up in their memory.
That's awesome. One of the last piece I'll add before we break to Q&A is I saw one of my favorite designers. He always posted that relationships are forever, design is temporary. So it's stuck with me over the years in the last year, and it's really about who you work with and the relationships you build. Because at my current role at Oracle, the entire senior leadership team has they've worked with each other throughout the years, and they're just trying to build like their dream team of who they want to go have fun with. And like they're farther along in their careers, but right, they get to like they're passionate about who they work with, and it's just been really interesting to see that friendship and trajectory grow. So definitely invest in like as a designer, invest in your personalization, being personal, building relationships, and having a lot of integrity in your work. All right, Gary's got a few Q&A questions lined up for us. Gary, go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Nathan. And for everyone, apologies in advance because I know we're not going to get to all of your Q&A questions. We've tried to answer many of them in the chat or off on the answered section. So check those out if you haven't seen those. I've boiled up a couple here that I think hopefully will be fun for our panelists to answer and also instructive for all of you. And the first one, selfishly, I can't wait to hear what our panelists have to say about this. Panelists, what are your biggest turnoffs you've seen on portfolios?
Too many words. Just honestly, there's something about being concise and being precise. And I'm not a researcher or designer, but I look at them as well if I'm on a loop. And you're not being concise and you're not going to succeed here because we need to be concise in our language on the job. So yeah, that's my very 2 cents quick answer.
I'd piggyback on that. Make sure you have good visuals that represent your process. And please, please, please just don't have any typos. And of course, if you're a designer, it should look like you're a designer, especially if you're a UX designer. It should be easy to get around your portfolio, obviously.
Represent your work correctly. If you work on a team, state that what you actually did on that team. Seattle's very small. I've actually had hiring managers reach out to me and saying, hey, I'm looking at this person, and they would show me their portfolio and they would actually verify if this person did the work. That happens much more in Seattle than we would like to admit.
Yeah, I've been in a lot of candidate feedback sessions where the team is, voting if they want to extend an offer or not, or hire this person. And usually what fails is when people are like, I don't know what this person did on that project, or they didn't convey it well or explain it well. So I'm not really, I didn't walk away with knowing what this person is capable of.
Yeah, I think having a really clear storyline in your portfolio presentation is really important. And know your audience is maybe a mix of like cross-functional teams such as PM, content writer, a designer, or just not always researchers or the same job role as you are. So knowing what's important for them to know, they may be interested in like impact of your work rather than your methodology. So really emphasize those when audience are those people.
Yeah, and I'll speak to more to presentation, I guess, like just to be honest and not be afraid to be a little self-critical even in there. And like one of the things that's happened in the last year, we actually will always ask, like, what would you change? What would you do differently? And someone actually said nothing. And that—
People say that?
Someone said that, and that's like, that's it. That's not true, right? You could have done something better. There's not something that you learned, and it's okay, and we all do it. So I think just to be real about who you are and authentic is really important.
Yeah, I'd piggyback on that. We asked the exact same question at Blink. I would just implore everybody to just go ahead and add that slide in at the end of every project. What could you have done better? If you could go back, what would you change? And I think, having that self-awareness is really important in this field. And also, I'd say something that's cringy in portfolio reviews is when people get defensive. There's a lot of really experienced, smart people in that room, and they're asking you a question or, digging into a design decision, not to hurt your personal feelings, but to get at your skills. So just be prepared for that, for critiques or feedbacks or questions on why you made a decision, and just be really humble and open to that. Don't get defensive. That's not something I know of that people want on their team.
Yeah,
Great.
some other questions that I got.
Oh, go ahead, Anting. I was going to move us along. Why
that?
don't we have you respond, and then I'll move us to our next question.
Cool, awesome. I just want to add there are some other questions that I got asked when I was interviewing on site, including like challenges or collaboration. How do you collaborate with others? And then another really common one is if you only have 1 week or 1 month of the time, how would you change the project? Because it really actually happening in industry, like right now, that I'm dealing with. So, yeah.
All right. We have a number of questions from people that are different but similar in the fact that they're wanting to get guidance from this panel around, they're coming from typically other industries, and they're wanting to know the best way to help transition into UX as a career. Some of them may have varying levels of portfolio depth in the actual work that they've done. They're not sure how much they should draw a direct connection to the work that they have done in their alternate careers. So wanting to get some guidance from this group about how to best present themselves.
It depends. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it depends, right? Are you a product manager that's now trying to be a UX designer? That experience is going to be super relevant, and that's going to be an easy pivot. Are you an interior designer that's going to be a UX researcher? Like that, you might have to position that a little bit differently. I think it's up to you though to do the legwork, and you've got to be ready with the story, or you're not going to get in any doors. And I think it's got to be short and sweet if it's not relevant, right? Like you've got to quickly make me understand why your time as a lawyer makes you a good candidate. But I don't want to hear about your work as a lawyer. It's not relevant, right? So to be blunt, kind of move into, and now this is what I'm doing in this field, and make me feel like you've either done some personal projects or gone through a certificate program or whatever it is to get the technical skills needed to do the job. I mean, that's the first thing through the gate, and that's why recruiters are spending 30 seconds on your application. Is the first thing they want to see is, does this person have the skills? I mean, are they a designer? Are they a researcher? So you've got to figure out a way to portray that to the recruiters, or you won't get too far.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that a little differently. I have this one slide on the presentations I do about all the different people that I've hired in their previous experience, like a hot dog worker, security guard, used car salesperson. It's a pretty wide range of fields. And I always do the research on what I believe the story that person has. And so it's almost up to the hiring managers. Basically, if you're coming from another field, craft a story about how you're moving over. And then if the hiring manager actually realizes that's a benefit or a value to their team, then that's actually goes in a plus if that's the place you want to work. The reality is a lot of hiring managers don't value people with other experiences very highly. And so it's going to be a little bit tricky there. But if you find one that does, then you have to have that story ready of why you're making the transition.
You can think of it as a filter. I love that point, Patrick. Like that's a filter for you. It's like, oh, then maybe I don't want to work there because they're always going to like see me as lesser because I don't have this and this experience or something like that. So you might be happier somewhere where they really get it.
Right. There is no front door for UX. And so literally if there's somebody that's only looking for a visual designer that's from New York or only looking for this group of people, it actually speaks a lot to them about, are they really focusing on culture fit versus culture add? People that come in from other fields are definitely culture adds. Like I've talked with Ian about that in previous conversations about that. And I could definitely see the value of somebody like him, how he adds to the culture of our company, where above other people that don't have the other experiences in life.
Great. I'm going to move us on to our last question, if that's okay for everyone. We would be remiss if we didn't have our panelists answer this next one, even though it's not really related to the loop. And it's because a lot of questions are on people's mind in this time of both social distancing or just in general. How do they actually get the attention of a hiring recruiter or someone? How do you even just get your foot in the door?
I think again, it's the last question in this one too, just gets back to like knowing your audience, like doing the research and truly understanding what that company is about, what the role is about. If you can find that, if you can go to their job board and see what jobs they're hiring for, but just really understanding, and it's kind of user centric, right? It's like understanding what that company or hiring position is really looking for, and trying, I think, best to find those threads to align with that.
Yeah, I'd piggyback on that and just say, obviously there's not the networking events and things like that where you can get in front of people and physically put yourself in front of them these days, but be smart about your digital outreach. So, where I'm I'm the HR director, my LinkedIn inbox is inundated. I am drowning, right? But somebody that I just hired from your program who's been at Blink for a year doesn't have that same inbox problem. So maybe that's your in. Maybe you ask them for a digital coffee. And then once you meet with them, you ask if there's any roles that they could put you forward for or things like that. So I think it's about doing your research on the company, thinking about the individuals on the other end of your email, right? Are you emailing a senior VP? You're probably not going to get a response, right? They're in back-to-back meetings all day. Their inboxes are full. But if you find somebody that you can connect to on some sort of a level that you can do some research digitally on, that might be a better in.
And for me, when I was applying, I really sent out a lot of application. And then also reach out to people that I had personal connection, like relationship with, and let them know that I'm open to opportunities so that they can keep me in mind when their team may be hiring or somebody they know may be hiring. And then also I feel resume on Monster or some other sites where there are a lot of contract recruiters are looking for candidates that help me get in touch with some contracting companies as well.
Great. We are at time with our Q&A, so I will pass it back over to Nathan. One last thing before I do, panelists and attendees, you'll notice that I dropped in the chat a link to a quick survey. Attendees, we would love to get your feedback. That will help sculpt future events should they occur and help them be even better for our attendees. Over to you, Nathan.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you very much for attending the HCDE Alumni Board's first remote session, the Loop. Even though we can't see you, even though the Loop or the panelists can't see you, I'd like everyone to give our panelists a virtual round of applause for taking the time to come out and talk to us. So we plan on posting the recording later in the week, as well as a follow-up article summarizing the panelists' advice onto our Medium account in the future. Once again, I'd like to reiterate, hit that Google form link that Gary posted. That's going to provide us feedback on how the session went, how we advertised and reached out to you, as well as how I did as a moderator, and also whether or not what you'd like to see in our future events, upcoming future events. With that, everyone, please stay safe and have a good night. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thanks.